What are some signs and symptoms that people should be aware of when it comes to chronic Lyme first, and then also mold? I know there's a lot of overlap there, but it'd be good to help differentiate those for people.
Yeah, I'll talk about them together first because I think it's easier to start with kind of the overlap and then I'll differentiate from there. Because the easiest thing, like the most common thing I will have is somebody walking into my office and they'll say, okay, here are my lab tests. And if you look at their lab tests, it's like this is where in conventional medicine, the labs are basically, and what we need to test for is so widespread that in conventional medicine, you might see 10 different specialists, for example. So, what I mean by that is somebody's walking in, they're like, oh, well, I probably need to see a gastroenterologist because of a stomach problem. I probably need to see a rheumatologist because I have a joint problem. I probably need to see a cardiologist because I have this heart thing going on. So, point is, it's that person that walks in and it's like, so many different parts of the body are involved. And so then when so many different parts of the body are involved, we have to look at, okay, what sort of things cause this widespread systemic type of thing where
Mm.
somebody could have a fatigue, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, headaches, menstrual disorders, insomnia, on and on and on and on, and what things can cause a wide variety of those types of things. Lyme and mold are both in that category. They're these great mimickers. So we're talking about, just I only have one main symptom like joint pain. That's more going to be, something like rheumatoid arthritis or maybe a underlying gut dysfunction that's leading to that rheumatoid arthritis, those types of things. But if we're like, oh, there's so many different symptoms involved and it's widespread, that's like that big clinical, keynote that says, hey, this could be Lyme or mold. And to your
Mm.
point earlier, where you brought up like the acute with the bullseye rash, the other thing to say is that less than 50% of people have that bullseye rash, right? So
Yeah.
it's like significant a number like people, that don't have that bullseye rash. And so because of that, it's, and even if somebody does, they could have it in their hairline or, under their scalp hair where it never gets seen. So just because we don't have that rash initially at some point doesn't mean we don't have Lyme. So that's
Mhm.
kind of how I would look at them as far as similarities from Lyme and mold. Do you have any other questions on that or you want me to go into the differences?
No, yeah, let's talk about the differences as well.
Okay. So differences, what I'll say here is like, for everybody that's listening to us is these differences are I'm going to explain them like you're a textbook and you are a human being and you're not a textbook. So I just like to, kind of preemptively say that as like anything that I'm saying, as far as this is more commonly mold, this is more commonly Lyme, I've seen it expressed either way, but there are textbook hallmarks that we can look out for as well. So, one of the things we want to consider is both Lyme and mold tend to cause pain. Not everybody has it, most people do. That if we're going textbook, high level, the pain of Lyme migrates, it moves, meaning it's in the shoulder one day, it's in the knee another day, it's in the hip another day. Mold pain tends to be smaller joints most commonly, and it tends to be stationary, meaning, okay, I wake up, my fingers are stiff every day. Mold pain oftentimes has a little bit more of a arthritis type of feeling to it, but not always. So that pain is like it's always in my hands, it's always in my wrists, it's always in my elbows, that sort of thing. Another thing is that because Lyme does move, and because Lyme and the bacteria that causes Lyme Borrelia is able to travel around the body and go in and out of dormancy. What tends to happen if something is truly a pure Lyme is days that are worse and days that are better. So this person that is a pure limey is likely going to say, oh yeah, it's like maddening because some days I wake up and it's like I think it's like maybe going away and I might be a little bit better and I have hope. And then the next day I crash.
Mm.
That can happen with mold because we can have days where, say, it rains, and if we're living in mold and mold is like, multiplying more quickly, it can happen with mold, but it's definitely not as common where it's like that regularity of change. So, those are two big things. I see like very commonly I see temperature dysregulation and night sweats. Somebody, a classic thing is a female she's 33 years old and she comes in and she's like, I think I'm going into early menopause because of all the like that night flash and those flashes of temperature problems. See that more with mold than with Lyme. I also see way more headaches and migraines. I see almost everybody with mold and Lyme, not everybody, but almost everybody has some level of headaches or migraines. And that's with mold. And with Lyme, that can happen. I don't see that quite as much. So those are some of the differences, but so much of the time, people have them both. And another
Mm.
key thing, and I don't know if we want to go here or not, so I'll just kind of phrase this and then you can tell me where you want to go, is that what often happens is people, like it's so common that somebody comes to me and it's like, okay, well, Dr. D, I've been to 15 different Lyme docs. What is your special magic secret sauce to kill the Lyme, right? And oftentimes it's like if we've seen that many doctors, then the problem tends to not be the treatment, especially if you've been working with good Lyme literate doctors. The problem is it's not only the Lyme, and people can get stuck in that diagnosis. So I don't know if you want me to say more on that or you want to drive us a different place. So I'll pause.
Yeah, I think that's important because, I think that humans, we've always been exposed to different types of Lyme bacteria, Borrelia, Babesia, things like that, and perhaps exposed more with our, our ancestors probably exposed more because they were outside a lot more, exposed to a lot of these things. And yet, they didn't seem to deal with these same types of symptoms. But of course, today we really see a lot of people dealing with, negative ramifications of Lyme. And then, with mold, right? All of us, mold isn't healthy for any of us, right? But there are certain percentage of the population that tends to be much more sensitive to it. And then I think it's like 25% they can't detox it. And then about 75% can detox it. And they start to have the symptoms more so when they're kind of the load builds up too much, right? And the other 25% has a real low threshold. So they start to notice the symptoms right away. In fact, I have a friend, like he'll walk into an Airbnb and he'll be like, oh, it's moldy in here. I got to leave. Right. Whereas like I could stay in an Airbnb for a few days in mold and like not notice anything because fortunately for my body, I'm not as sensitive to it. So I think everybody has a different threshold and different kind of tolerance point to it. And so I think that's really important to understand. And like you said, a lot of times these conditions are together. Why are people dealing with Lyme more? And I think the hypothesis is that our immune system is weaker, right? And there could be a number of reasons for that, but one is certainly mold exposure.
Yeah, and the comment I'll say on that too that I think is really important for people to hear, something that you said is just so pivotal, which is the 25% of the population, because it's so common. I can give 30 different stories at least of conversations I've had with working with people in a relationship and they're married or they're partnered
Mm,
and they're living with their,
yeah.
their spouse or their partner. And I'm trying to convince them that the mold in their body is coming from their house and they don't want to get inspected. They don't want to
Mm,
remediate. They don't want to do all these things. And they, the argument is, well, my partner's fine or my kids are fine. So it can't be in the house. And it's a key thing that sometimes I spend months really working to help people understand this before they can conceptualize and they're willing to actually test for this. So I really appreciate that you bring up that point, and I hope it's one of the take home points that all the listeners get today, is that because of this genetic anomaly, and the way I've come to find the easiest way of explaining that genetic anomaly is it's anomaly in the immune system, where the immune system doesn't recognize the toxins from mold. And when the immune system doesn't recognize and tag the toxins, it can't remove them. So the toxins more easily build up because somebody without this genetics, like you said, they go into an Airbnb, they're living in this house, and their body can actually see the toxins and their immune system sees the
mhm.
toxins. And when it does, it removes them. And I just think it's such an important point just to understand here, because if you're sick and you're listening to this and you're inflamed and you're like, what the heck is causing this? And you hear this, like the last thing I want people to think is like, well, it can't be my house. We got it. It's definitely not mold because X, Y, and Z person in my house is fine. Well, it might be that X, Y, Z person in your house doesn't have that mold genetic. And so their body is detoxing, like you said, is below that threshold that is like built up enough, and their body gets that mold toxin out enough where it doesn't cause inflammation, it doesn't cause those symptoms. And for everybody else, we have this huge problem of this, this inflammatory load really building up. So we got to listen to the tests, run things like urinary mycotoxin tests. We got to figure out what is actually going on. And remember that just because your family or your roommate or other people that are living with you, just because they're fine, doesn't mean the house is
Mhm.
fine. Yep.
Yeah, it's important. What are some things in the patient history that you look at, like the initial intake forms that people are filling out when they come to see you that could clue you in to perhaps Lyme or mold issues?
One of the biggest things that helps me with the patient intake forms is less about, in some ways, about what the specifics they say and more about tracking. So, from a standpoint of like, what we're looking for, it is looking for these widespread symptom picture. But largely what I'm looking for is what are the things they're having and are we on the right track? Like, for example, I had this patient come in. The number one thing she had was this facial neuropathy. Her face was like, going numb sometimes, tingling sometimes. It was just bothering her every day. And the number, she had a huge list of symptoms. And so, of course, we're testing for Lyme and mold and all these different things and co-infections, toxic metals, nutrient imbalances, a ton, widespread testing. The one thing I did while we were waiting for the test was I changed her diet. I took her off gluten. So she comes back to me, but 3 weeks later or so, and we're going through some of the labs that had started coming in. And I started going through the symptom list that I took at the beginning. And first thing I ask is, has anything changed? No, Dr. D, everything's fine. Everything's fine. And so then I started going through the symptom list. Well, how about that facial tingling? Is that gone? And she looks at me. That was the number one symptom she came and saw in to see me for. And she's like, Dr. Dianne, I completely forgot I had that. It's been gone since
Mhm.
I changed my diet. Right. So, so from that tracking standpoint, this is what I tell people too around this is why, working with somebody that can help, track like myself, like yourself, like, and, these amazing people that you're interviewing on the summit is super important because some of what we're doing as, medical providers is taking that history and the brain is so oriented to focus on what is going wrong that sometimes we don't actually realize that a symptom's gone away, that we're actually moving towards health unless somebody is like actually tracking those things. So, from that initial intake, like I do have a very thorough initial intake, as most of us in this field do. And largely what I'm looking for is, are there multiple symptoms involved? A lot of times when people or systems involved, meaning organ systems, heart, lungs, gut, skin, joints, et cetera, right? So we're looking at all these different areas of the body to see if it's involved. So I'm looking at those. And then oftentimes, too, by the time people have gotten to me, they have run the basics, right? They've had MRIs to see what their brain's doing. They've they've done all the basic labs. They've looked at thyroid, they looked at adrenal. So a lot of those basic things, as far as the big, bad, scary things with imaging and the basic blood work has been already evaluated and eliminated. So then I'm, looking at these wide symptom picture. And what I'm saying is like, if we're seeing so many different areas involved, then that's when I go after these sorts of things. Times I would not is, let's say they came in and they had all the basics done, they've had some higher level tests done, and the only symptom they really actually had was, say, gas and bloating. Well, that's probably going to be an indicator that I should likely start with small intestinal bacteria overgrowth testing or something like that, that is not always looked for in conventional medicine as compared to Lyme or mold. So I'm really looking for that. How do we have is that list like long? Is it like a
Yeah.
grocery list long of things going on?